September 28, 2025, at exactly 6:34 p.m. The screens turned red simultaneously in Russia's western border. Integrated Air Defense Command Centers. This was not a simple attack coming from a single direction. It was a synchronized nightmare targeting Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk at the same time. At that moment, two M142 HIMARS batteries had moved into firing position. They were positioned just behind civilian settlements north of Kiev. Dozens of low and medium altitude targets were advancing from Ukrainian territory deep into Russia. They were UJ-26 Bober ER and Sheila 400 long-range kamikaze drones, each carrying warheads weighing 30 to 50 kilo. The Panzer S-1 and Tor M2 batteries in the area reacted immediately. The sky filled with flashes illuminated by missile trails and anti-aircraft artillery shells. Each successful interception was recorded as a victory in the ledgers of Russian control center operators. The airspace was secure. The systems were functioning flawlessly. However, this artificially created sense of security was merely the first act of a carefully designed, multi-layered strategy. While they hunted the noise in the sky, the real threat advanced silently and lethally in orbit, hidden behind this electronic cacophony. 6 completely different high-speed trails appeared on the radar screens, monitoring Belgorod. These were not drones. They weren't flying horizontally. They were diving straight down from the upper layers of the atmosphere at speeds exceeding 2.5 times the speed of sound. Silent for a moment. This was the moment the game changed. This threat was M31G LRS rockets fired from the M142 HIMARS system. Without hesitation, the Russian commander ordered the activation of the S-400 battery, which had remained silent until then and was stationed in a secret location, the most valuable asset in the area. The massive 92N6E gravestone radar emitted a powerful signal, locking onto all 6 targets, and within seconds, 6 48N6DM interceptor missiles were launched into the sky at Mach 6. A few seconds later, 6 large explosions occurred in the upper layers of the atmosphere. In the Russian control center, the operator's voice echoed.
All targets destroyed. Direct hits. All 6 ballistic threats intercepted.
A wave of relief and pride swept through the room. They believed they had repelled the most complex and multi-layered attack in their history. However, hundreds of kilometers away, in a secret underground headquarters in Ukraine, no one was disappointed. The first act had begun hours earlier. A massive swarm of hundreds of UAVs launched toward 8 different regions of Russia. Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Tula, Yaroslavl, Rostov, Novgorod, and Samara. This was one of the largest and most coordinated drone attacks Russia had ever seen, and its purpose was not to hit the target, but to create a veil of chaos. While the Russian military declared victory, they were unaware that they had fallen into a massive trap. Deplete their ammunition, and most importantly, distract their attention by locking their radars in different directions. Because the real target was in Russia's Belgorod Oblast, about 90 kilometers from Kharkiv. This was no ordinary target. As confirmed by open-source intelligence platforms and satellite data, the thermal power plant, known as Belgorodskaya TETS, was a systemic center of gravity. It was the heart of the entire region's military and industrial nerve network. This plant supplied the main supply and command areas of Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, responsible for some of the bloodiest operations in eastern Ukraine. However, Ukrainian intelligence knew that this target was heavily guarded, precisely because it was so critical. This is where Ukraine's ingenuity came into play, a strategy to saturate and deceive Russian air defenses. In a secret underground headquarters in Ukraine.
Fired. We have the exact coordinates, operating frequency, and signal strength of the S-400 radar. Send the second salvo. Fire at will.
At that moment, what the Russians thought was victory turned out to be a cruel trap. Those $6 million HIMARS rockets were not an attack vehicle. They were the most expensive and fastest decoys in history. Their mission was not to hit the target, but to force that secret S-400 to fire, revealing its location, identity, and electronic fingerprint. This created a fatal gap in Russian defenses. The S-400's coordinates and frequency information were immediately relayed to a second HIMARS battery waiting in a different location and to heavy kamikaze drones like the UJ-26 Bober advancing toward the area. In a different location, the second HIMARS crew, waiting in absolute silence, received the updated fire order. The second 6-round salvo was launched at the vulnerable target, the main target, which was either reloading new missiles at that moment or in a critical recalibration cycle, lasting just a few seconds after a powerful engagement. The thermal power plant, the heart of the Belgorod energy network, was struck. With the launch of this second salvo, the air of victory in the Russian command center gave 6 new ballistic trails appeared on the screen. The second wave was coming. Screams rose. The M31 GMLRS missiles had crossed the Russian border in just 40 seconds from an orbit close to the edge of the atmosphere. Operators frantically tried to re-engage the S-400, but the system was in its critical few seconds of blind spot. Meanwhile, the Panzer and Tor batteries were still battling the Bober and Shilka drones filling the sky, now heading straight for the known positions of the S-400 batteries. As the HIMARS missiles made their final dive toward the target, the S-400's radar reactivated, detected the threat, and a Russian officer attempted to alert his superiors. But at that very moment, a UJ-26 Bober, which had been flying low and hidden, made its final dive directly toward the command vehicle housing the radar control center. The S-400's radar was not designed to detect or intercept such a small target at such close range. The nearby Panzer and Tor systems were already overwhelmed, targeting other drone swarms approaching from multiple directions. For just a few seconds, a deadly gap opened in the defense network. When the UJ-26 Bober struck the brain of the S-400 with its 40-kilo warhead, less than 30 seconds remained before the HIMARS missiles reached their target. The gravestone radar screen went dark. The only system capable of stopping the second wave was now blind. The time was exactly 18:47. 6 HIMARS rockets, each programmed with a circular error probability of less than 5 meters, struck the main transformer station, the heart of Belgorod's energy grid, with absolute precision. This was not a simple explosion, but the beginning of an uncontrollable chain reaction. The 90-kilogram warheads tore through tons of steel and copper, shattering the core of the facility. High-voltage lines snapped like whips, and a massive electrical arc lit up the sky, turning night into day for a brief blinding moment. The energy supplied by the Belgorod thermal power plant powered everything: the radars that served as the eyes of the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems, the complex communication networks in underground command shelters, and most crucially, the electrical signaling system, the lifeblood of the railway network that carried ammunition, fuel, and soldiers to the front. Striking this plant didn't just turn off the lights, it blinded an army's eyes, deafened its ears, and crippled its legs. When the power grid collapsed, a devastating domino effect followed. Water pumps stopped, internet lines went silent. A city of 500,000 people came to a standstill. As the hours passed, the blackout evolved into an existential crisis. People were trapped in elevators, roads became gridlocked as traffic lights failed, and stores could only trade in cash. Heating systems shut down, water supplies dried up, and mobile networks collapsed. Miles-long queues formed at gas stations. Fights broke out over generator fuel, and panicked crowds stormed supermarkets. Chaos. While the Russian Defense Ministry triumphantly declared that it had shot down 230 UAVs, it was completely unaware that it had walked straight into a massive trap. When the governor of Belgorod spoke at 7:07 p.m., the Kremlin was suddenly confronted with the bitter truth. The Defense Ministry's proud claim of hundreds of targets destroyed instantly collapsed under Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov's panicked admission. There has been an attack on our critical infrastructure facility, and we are experiencing major power outages. On the evening of September 28th, Russian media's attempt to portray the incident as a transformer failure was debunked within seconds by NASA's firm satellite system, which detected a massive fire in the area, and by videos taken by civilians. This operation was a massive military symphony in which more than 230 UAVs served a single purpose: to ensure that a few HIMARS rockets reached their target. And when those rockets reached their target, they destroyed not only a power plant, but also Russia's myth of invincibility. Ukraine's precision strike operation against the Belgorod thermal power plant on September 28, 2025, will go down in history as a turning point in the war. The consequences of the Belgorod attack extended far beyond the destroyed transformers and darkened cities. It was a catastrophic collapse of a system and fundamentally shook Russia's established military doctrine. Russian military thinking has always been based on the idea of keeping the war far from its own borders. The Belgorod attack painfully demonstrated that this doctrine is no longer valid in the era of long-range precision weapons in Ukraine's hands. The concept of a front line no longer existed. A rocket fired from KKE could hit Moscow's backyard. The impact of this situation on the morale of soldiers at the front was devastating in the truest sense of the word. To understand the genius of the attack, one must first understand the target itself. Why the Belgorod skies was not a randomly chosen civilian infrastructure facility, but rather the heart of an entire region's military and industrial nerve network, a systemic center of gravity. Ukraine's target was not the megawatts produced by the power plant. The real target was everything that depended on those megawatts. The railways supplying the Russian army's southern front, the factories producing ammunition, and the command centers directing the troops. According to analyses by think tanks such as the Institute for the Study of War, the Belgorod Oblast served as a vital rear base for operations in Ukraine. This region in particular sustained the main supply and command areas of Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, responsible for the bloodiest operations in eastern Ukraine. The uninterrupted and stable energy provided by the plant was essential for the functioning of every part of this massive military structure. A power outage meant that the region's ammunition depots, armored vehicle maintenance workshops, electronic listening stations, and most importantly, the forward command centers where troops were managed would instantly be plunged into darkness and silence. Of course, these facilities had generators. However, a generator cannot rotate the massive S-400 radar antennas for hours. Nor can it simultaneously and reliably power strategic satellite communication terminals or all the barracks housing thousands of soldiers. That night, Russian commanders found themselves transported from the battlefield of the 21st century back to the dark analog world of the 20th century. Encrypted communication lines were cut, situational awareness screens went dark, and the flow of real-time intelligence from the front lines was severed like a knife. It was like cutting off the oxygen supply to an army's brain. The wheels of the industrial war machine also came to a sudden halt. Industrial facilities in and around Belgorod had rapidly shifted to producing ammunition, military equipment parts, and repair services with the onset of war. Facilities such as the Karachevki Electrorail factory in the Bryansk region, which was attacked, specialized in the development and production of critical electrical connectors for military and industrial use. The power outage was a crowbar inserted into the gears of this massive production machine. Production lines suddenly stopped with a deafening screech. Machines pressing artillery shells fell silent. Robotic arms welding tank armor hung suspended in midair. Modern industry depends on stable, high-quality energy. The fluctuating power supplied by generators cannot run precision CNC machines or lines producing complex electronic components. Every passing hour meant hundreds fewer artillery shells, dozens fewer repaired vehicles, and truckloads less ammunition reaching the front lines. But the most devastating link in this domino effect emerged when it hit the railway network, the steel backbone of the Russian army. Russian military doctrine relies heavily on railways to transport large quantities of materials and personnel over long distances. Belgorod was one of the most critical junctions of this backbone. The lines passing through here connected resources from Russia's interior to Donbass and Crimea via Rostov in the south. A large portion of these lines are electrified. Using only a few hundred kilo of explosives, Ukraine managed to take tens of thousands of tons of steel and thousands of soldiers out of action without firing a single shot. The military genius of the Belgorod operation lies not only in choosing the right target, but also in the multi-layered deception strategy. Operators frantically tried to re-engage the S-400, but the system was in its critical few seconds of blind spot. Meanwhile, the Panzer and Tor batteries were still battling the Bober and Shilka drones filling the sky, now heading straight for the known positions of the S-400 batteries. As the HIMARS missiles made their final dive toward the target, the S-400's radar reactivated, detected the threat, and a Russian officer attempted to alert his superiors. But at that very moment, a UJ-26 Bober, which had been flying low and hidden, made its final dive directly toward the command vehicle housing the radar control center. The S-400's radar was not designed to detect or intercept such a small target at such close range. The nearby Panzer and Tor systems were already overwhelmed, targeting other drone swarms approaching from multiple directions. For just a few seconds, a deadly gap opened in the defense network. When the UJ-26 Bober struck the brain of the S-400 with its 40-kilo warhead, less than 30 seconds remained before the HIMARS missiles reached their... This was a brilliant victory of intelligence over brute force with the cost calculated. This operation proved that modern warfare is no longer won only on the front lines between tanks and trenches, but also at critical junctures in the enemy's strategic depth. Through the perfect synchronization of technology intelligence and psychological warfare, Ukraine did not merely strike a target. It also forced its adversary to use its own strength against itself, delivering a masterclass in the art of modern warfare.